It's with great pleasure now that I get a chance to catch up with a very dear friend of mine. I'll say old friend of mine because we're both really old. We worked together 30 years ago when we worked at BBC Cleveland in Teesside in the UK. And Alan at that time was one of the biggest names in radio. And certainly his mid-morning show was respected across the planet. And he traveled across the planet doing after dinner speaking. And also he was a published author, but he was well known for traveling to places like Dubai long before I'd even heard of where it was. Alan's written some incredible books, and his latest one really excites me. It's all about John Lennon. If he was around and he was here today, what would be going through his mind and what would his life be like? So, Alan, thank you for joining us. Talk to us about here today and the amazing John Lennon.
Great to see you, Dave. And I must say, first of all, you've learned early on a grey beard makes you look wise, doesn't it?
I've
I
got no
discovered that
choice.
me neither, but in Dubai many years ago, I found in meetings, if you did that, the good contacts there would think I was thinking some brilliant thoughts. I was actually thinking, I don't know what to say next, but it worked. But yeah, great to talk to you. And the thing about John Lennon, I mean, I grew up in the 60s and I learned to play guitar because it was compulsory. And being a kid of the 60s, fascination with the Beatles, who were still massively popular worldwide, as you know. And last year, I was speaking in Bermuda, which was amazing. And I don't know if you know the story, many people don't, that just before John Lennon died in 1980, he went on a sailboat trip to Bermuda. There's a great story behind it, which is in the book. And the 5 years before he'd been in Bermuda, he'd written nothing, real writer's block. And the few months he was in Bermuda, he wrote 20 new songs, including some of his best. And he was trying to get his wife Yoko to come and live with him, but she wanted to stay in New York. So he went back, and sadly, as you know, he was killed outside the Dakota building. So my head started thinking, what if he had stayed in Bermuda and not gone back? And the idea really fizzed in my head. I wrote the book, finished the book in about 3 months, because I had this writer's panic. What if somebody else is thinking of the same idea? So I've got it written and published, and it's done amazingly well. I've just been on a lovely trip doing promo events in Miami and Mexico, would you believe? Because anywhere in the world, they love it. And what I like about the book, and people have been very kind in reviews, I've tried to get inside John Lennon's head, and I feel as though he's talking to me, which is either suggesting I need therapy or it's a good thing for a writer. But in the book, he's living in Bermuda, and he gets Paul McCartney comes to see him, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, they're all alive. And they're talking and looking back on memories of time in Hamburg and Liverpool, and I've been to those places a lot. And it's really struck a chord with people. And we're doing events now which are working really well. We've got this little pattern where I do a talk about the book with some funnies, and then we have a supper of scouse. I don't know if they serve it in Dubai, Dave, but they will soon. It was this kind of sailor stew that they used to do, which the Beatles had when they were short of money. So we do an event, I do my bit, scouse, and then we get the Beatles band or a Beatles John Lennon guy to do some music, and I play a couple of numbers with them. And we've got bookings all over the world, and we're hoping Dubai soon because it's really taken off.
Well, there's a huge fan base for the John Lennon and the Beatles stuff. It's still 30 years, 40 years later, the most popular band of all time. You can
Yeah,
see that by Paul McCartney celebrating his birthday at 18, going on tour and being sold
yeah.
out everywhere. And so there's a massive demand for this. Now, the book, I love the book, but I also love it for many reasons, including the fact that the movie yesterday hinted with Robert Carlyle playing
Yeah,
John Lennon years later. And it makes you think, wow, what if? And
yeah,
that's such a, I mean, I don't think there's a single Beatles fan who watched that movie who wasn't thinking the same thing, but not many of them were able to put it into a book and
yeah,
the ongoing adventures of John Lennon.
yeah. The funniest thing was I started writing the book before yesterday came out, and when I saw it, and again, the guy who played Lennon in the film I thought was superb. Obviously, a man happy in life despite Beatles not happening for him in the film. But what tickles me is I'm doing an event in the spring in Hamburg, Germany. And as you know, the Beatles did their apprenticeship there. They played 8-hour stints at night in seedy nightclubs in Hamburg.
Right.
And a good friend from Teesside, originally, strangely enough, he's put me in touch with this guy who looks and sounds like John Lennon. And he sings like him, he plays guitar like him. And the event we're doing at the Hard Rock Cafe in Hamburg later this year, I'm going to do an interview on stage, interviewing John Lennon when he's 70. And he looks so much like him, it gives me shivers thinking about it. But the thing about something like this is that as a writer, you think if you're lucky enough to get an idea that strikes a chord with people and people like it and keep coming back for more, and I get a real kick out of it. And I do get this feeling, John Lennon would have been thinking, yeah, I mean, he was only 40 when he was killed, which is really sad, you know, the life he had to come. And the great thing about a book like this, it's deliberately meant to get people thinking, you know, this whole thing about I Ching and what happens if you believe that there's something driving your life. And, you know, look at things that have happened to you, Dave, and your career that's gone so well. And who would have thought when we were working together in Middlesbrough, England, all those years ago, you'd end up as the big name in Dubai and beyond. You know, you don't know why things happen, but they do.
What do you think that John Lennon would think of the world we're in today? The music business, first of all, but also the divisiveness challenges. But I think the world is a better place in many ways, but there are more vocal idiots out there than possibly ever before. How do you think that would affect John Lennon, his view of everything?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides to it. My memory of the 60s, you know, I was a student at university and the world was about to happen. But the point was there was a massive optimism then about things getting better. And I think John Lennon would look at today's world and be very sad about things which have happened, you know, like the situation in Ukraine and so on, the fact it's still a very unequal world, and the fact that people don't understand each other's cultures enough. And what's impressed me about time, as you said, I've been going to Dubai for nearly 30 years. When I first went there, I think there was one hotel at the airport and one at the, was it the Hyatt near the creek? And look at it now. But when you look at how the world is getting better and worse, what impressed me about Dubai is they've got a different culture, you know, a lot of Muslim friends in Dubai and beyond, but they understand people have different ideas, different ways of looking at it, but you can have two views and still be friends and still get along together. And I think the more you get of that, and, you know, some people say the Lennon song Imagine can be a little bit sugary, but the central kind of idea is fine, imagine a world where people can not think about borders, but think about what unites them. And what I love is the Beatles' legacy. I've just come back from speaking on a cruise ship, reaching 7 seas around the Caribbean. You're thinking life's tough. But when you go on there, they always have a good production company on it. And the company on Regent is superb. 2 young guys, 2 young girls, both in their early 20s. And I'm thinking they did a brilliant Beatles set one night on deck in the Caribbean. Can you imagine that? But I'm just thinking, you know, the Beatles' last live performance was 1969. So the 4 dancers and singers in the production company weren't born until 30, 40 years after that. But they still see Beatles right at the top of the tree. And, you know, that's down to the skill, the talent, the genius of the Beatles and the songs that they write. And you look at one that always gets people filling up. You know, the John Lennon song, In My Life, There Are Places I'll Remember. And I do that one because I love it. But what strikes me as well is that when you look at any Beatles music, it wasn't all brilliant, but 99% was good, which is not a bad ratio. You start to think, you know, where did that come from? And one theme I come out with in the book is that if there's something up there driving human society and human life, perhaps there is an injection of genius comes out every so often. And perhaps people like, you know, Shakespeare, Leonardo da Vinci, Einstein, and the Beatles had the same plug-in of inspiration for somewhere. And I'm trying to wrestle in my own head about where that comes from. And that comes up in the second book as well, about how does that happen?
I remember talking, listening to a podcast about Mel C, talking about her life and the Spice Girls. Do you know how long the Spice Girls were together from when they made it to when they broke up?
Longer than people think, was it?
Have a guess how long they were in the charts, traveling the world, and a complete phenomenon.
Oh, perhaps a year?
A year and a half. A year and a half, the Spice Girls. After that, they'd split up. They had a third album that wasn't working. And you look at the way they dominated, and that was goodness knows how many years, 30 years ago, something like that. You know? I think we get this time in the sun, and the Beatles had all split up by the time they were 27, 28.
Yeah. It's quite amazing. And there's one guy I mentioned in the book, and I always mention in talks about the Beatles, where one little thing in life can go slightly wrong. A man called Sam Leach. I was lucky enough, well, not lucky, it was planned that I would meet him. I did a TV program about a hotel in Liverpool, Epstein House. I was meeting my producer in a pub in Liverpool, and I was early, she was late. And I saw this guy in the corner, and this pub was quite odd. There were little groups of 4s and 5s, and this guy in the corner by himself. And people kept looking across and smiling and laughing. And being a fan of the underdog. I went across and I thought, I know that guy. And I said to him, are you Sam Leach? And it was. And what Sam did, way back in 1961, he wasn't their manager, but he was fixing gigs for the Beatles very early on. And he thought they'd done a lot in Liverpool, Manchester, that kind of area. He wanted to get them into London. But Sam was a bit of an enthusiastic amateur. And he booked them into Aldershot. Now, you probably know Aldershot. It's a little town for people who don't know the UK. Little town outside London, long way from the West End. And it has a big army base nearby. So in the street, you wouldn't meet a West End agent. You might find some army guys having a fight in a beer, but not big guys. And anyway, yeah, and by Sam's own admission, he was rubbish at paperwork. He booked a full-page ad, or he thought he had, in the local paper for the concert. And he didn't read the contract, which said pay up front or we don't publish. He didn't pay up front. They didn't publish it. So he got 18 people at this gig, would you believe? And a matter of months later, they were the biggest name in the world. So they parted company, and but for that, he'd probably have still been around. But I chatted to Sam for over an hour, and he said, you know, the thing is, when people ignore me, they don't realise, you know, I did things with the Beatles, and they laugh at me when I tell them. We chatted for a very long time, and he asked where I was staying, and I told him Epstein House in Liverpool. Next morning, a little parcel arrived, really old-fashioned, brown paper and string. And inside, there was a note that said, great to meet you, Alan. Really enjoyed our chat. Few things you might like. Unpublished pictures of the Beatles early on.
Oh,
and I've got this lot of pictures. And sadly, Sam passed away a few years ago, but I keep thinking, thanks, Sam. And, you know, I'd never sell them, unless you're making an offer, Dave. But no, I'd never sell them. But, you know, somebody like that, a little chink in history where it went wrong for him, and, you know, things that went right for the Beatles all that way through. But, yeah, the more you get into this, the more fascinating it gets. And I do become a bit like a preacher going around saying, you know, read this, you know, find out what really happened.
Absolutely. I find it, I mean, it's fascinating, the wrong turn or the right turn and the spin of I mean, there's so many instances where right place, wrong time. For me, I mean, we worked together for about 2-3 years at the BBC. I got bad treatment at the time, which was enough for me to leave the country. And thank goodness I did. If I'd stayed where I was, as we talked earlier, you know, the demise of radio in the UK, the way BBC is being marginalized in what it does, I would have been one of many trying to stay afloat. Instead, I had to go somewhere else, and I got the successes that I got. So I've got no complaints about it, but sometimes at the time it can seem a little bit rough, but you never know. You can only read life backwards.
Yeah, life's like that. And, you know, you would have been ticking over in the British radio industry, as you say, at a time of decline. And now you're going off like a Formula One car in the Middle East. So, you know, things happen for a reason, don't they?
Absolutely. So with that, how can people get access to the book? And when are you coming to Dubai? And are you going to include it on your world tour?
Well, the modern world's brilliant. You can order it in any bookshop in the world, you know, Dubai, UK, anywhere. Just ask for Here Today by Alan Wright and your bookshop can order it. Or the other quick way, and a lot of people like buying through Amazon these days. So I'm sounding American, Amazon in the UK. But yeah, Amazon have it in paperback, hardback, and Kindle if you like reading your books that way. Well, the sequel to Here Today I'm working on now has John Lennon going back towards the end of his life, partly to revisit some places he'd been, like the Amsterdam Hilton, where they did the famous Bed In for Peace, and the hotel in Montreal, Canada, where they did the same thing. And in the new book, he's going to be in Dubai, because one thing John would love about Dubai would be that lovely mix of cultures you mentioned. And he would love to sit with, as he does in book one, people of all faiths and none. So whether you had no faith, or you're a Christian, or a Muslim, or a Hindu, or a Sikh, John would get it. And he would know better than anybody that people of different faiths had more things bringing them together than keeping them apart. And I'm looking forward, I'm on to the chapter now where he's heading off to Dubai, not quite knowing what to expect. And the fact that I can keep him alive in his 70s and 80s, traveling the world is, you know, it's a gift for me, and I'm loving it.
Absolutely. And maybe when he comes to Dubai, I can take him on a tour. Just nudge, show him around the place, nudge, my mate Dave in Dubai. Amazing. Time flies past, but it's always a pleasure to catch up with you, Alan. I look forward to catching up with you when you come to Dubai, and lots of people to buy that book and get you traveling around the world, touring, playing music, and keeping the memory of John Lennon alive. It's a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
A huge pleasure having time with you, Dave.